Welcome once again to Superhero Stuff You Should Know. This is Ben, and as usual, I'm joined by...
It's Andrew, everybody, and we have Robert N. Skir with us, screenwriter extraordinaire, one of the architects of your childhood, and we're going to get into it.
Yes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
So, one of the, you and I met at LA Comic-Con, and I think the big thing that jumped out at me when you were talking was not only your credits. You've worked on, Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, Superman the Animated Series, any of the, 90s, the animated series on that. Your name's on them at some point. But you also brought up that before all of that, you wrote your own X-Men script in 1990, and I know that the X-Rated podcast, the X-Men Animated Series Rewatch podcast, has kind of done a dramatization of that. But for those who haven't gotten to hear that, I have not had a chance to check it out myself. Could you go a little bit more into sort of what was behind that script and sort of what your vision was in 1990 for an X-Men movie?
Well, it was always my dream to write an X-Men screenplay. And when I say always, I'm talking about, during a convention in around 1979 or so, John Byrne said that somebody asked him about an X-Men movie, and his response was that the rights were with a Canadian animation company called Nelvana. And as soon as he mentioned the idea of an X-Men movie, I just started thinking about what an X-Men movie would be. And so by about 1981 or 82, I had this image of what I wanted the film to be. And by that time, it was like the end of the Byrne-Claremont era. And I came to UCLA to study screenwriting. And one of my main goals when I came here was to write an X-Men screenplay. That was 1983. I waited until 1990 when I was a good enough writer to actually sit down and write the screenplay. But during that whole time, I had this thing gestating. I was always thinking about it in the back of my mind, and I always knew what I wanted the overall story to be. And it's what I wound up writing. I wrote it very much as a love letter to Byrne and Claremont and Terry Austin, because that is, to me, the definitive era of the X-Men. That's when they rose to real greatness, and everything afterwards is kind of built on the foundation of what they had done. And it's where my love for the characters came from. So the team resembled that era. And I wrote it in 1990 because, as I say, I felt I was a strong enough writer at that point. But also, they had just released, Batman, the Batman film with Michael Keaton opened, the previous summer. And then Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out, and it was a huge hit. And I was somewhat let down by the fact that everyone knew what mutants were now at that point. They were teenage turtles who yelled cowabunga and loved pizza. And I'm like, okay, someday they're going to find the X-Men, and they're going to do a really shitty job. So I want to make sure that it's done right on paper at least once. And so I wrote an X-Men screenplay, and then that was like 1990. And ever since then, I've been refining it, just sort of like tinkering with it periodically. Every now and then, like once every 5 or 10 years, I'll pick it up and go, oh, look at that. And just sort of just sort of play with it a little bit. And so when I was on the X-Rated X-Men podcast, they were asking me about it. And I said, well, if you're interested, I'll send it to you. And under the condition that you don't show it to anybody else, just you can take a look at it. And they read it, and they were like, we really want to perform this. We really want to put this on. And I'm like, there's no reason not to at this point. There's absolutely no reason not to do it. So so I said, okay, put together a cast and have fun. And they did. What they did turned out to be pretty good, pretty fun. And I was delighted to see it. But my big takeaway from it was that I hadn't read it in years. I mean, more than 8 or 9 years. I mean, it's been a long time since I read the script. And when I read it, I was very surprised by how much I loved it. I mean, I felt like, the descriptions were really good, and the dialogue was really tight, and the structure was really strong. And it kind of reinvigorated me, as a writer. It's like, oh my God, this is really inspiring. It's like, I know what I'm doing. So I've been writing a lot more lately since then. But I was really, I was very, very tickled and complimented by the fact that they wanted to do it. And so I was glad that they did, and that my X-Men was finally going to, find an audience of some kind. I wrote it in 1990, by the way. That was a full 10 years before the first film came out. And ever since then, over the last 20 years or 25 years of X-Men movies, um, everything from my screenplay wound up at some point in some manner in the films. So when you when you see the script, it's like, oh, okay, it's they can't produce it now because it's going over all the turf that's already been gone over, which is kind of a downside. But what you can see when you see it is the distillation and the way that I did it, and the voices of the characters as I had them, because the movies have been their own thing. I mean, they always are. They should be.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did in mine was I really wanted to capture what it was I loved in the Byrne Claremont issues, and so I tried to make the characters completely consistent with the characters they were in the comics. In terms of their personalities, in terms of their relationships, in terms of everything. I wanted you to think, if you read it, that you were reading a script for a Byrne Claremont issue. So I don't think you get that from the movies. So that's what I'm most proud of, is that I feel like I sort of, made a really good homage to these books that I really loved.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
I remember you talking about, in your mind, you were writing the characters, not necessarily specifically Hollywoodized versions or specific actors in those roles.
But I did have
So
two
the
actors
lineup.
in mind for roles, though. I
Go ahead.
I wanted Kurtwood Smith to be Professor X. Do you know who Kurtwood Smith is?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would have been different. Yeah,
Um,
from
and I wanted
RoboCop.
what is his name?
Ray Wise.
Ray Wise. Ray Wise was Magneto. And I saw him in the X-Men First Class, and I'm like, damn, that's my Magneto. I thought he was the perfect age. He had the perfect look. He had the perfect demeanor. It seems very strange to me to have Ian McKellen as Magneto, because it's like the X-Men are fighting an old man. This just doesn't seem like a fair fight on any level. He's an old man. But Ray Wise seems like he seemed like the perfect person to be playing Magneto. So I saw the two of them together at a screening
Mhm.
of RoboCop, because they're both in that film. They had an anniversary screening, and I'm very disappointed with myself for not getting a picture of myself with the two of them. They were having a conversation together, and I would love to have told them, "Hey,
Mhm.
by the way, in another universe, very much like our own, you are both the stars of the greatest comic book adaptation of all time." But
I'm sure somebody also could have photoshopped the Magneto outfit on Ray, and a little bit of Professor X stuff on Kurtwood.
you listen to his voice, and if you look at his eyes, they're really kind of got this piercing thing going on when he plays villainous kinds of characters. Um,
Hmm.
Even when he's not villainous characters, he really looks and feels. Because I always thought that Professor X should have. Well, he shouldn't look like your dad. He shouldn't be, this sort of like warm uncle person. I think that Patrick Stewart's character he's far too paternal and far too benign. I always thought that Professor X should have sort of a slight edge to him, where it's like, in a lot of the issues, it almost felt like he had his own agenda, and he wasn't as
Hmm.
benign as he looked. And, I wouldn't have made him sinister in any way, but and I think the best incarnation of him was around the time that Paul Smith was illustrating the book. I thought that's when they got the professor. They got his tone the most right. But I always felt that there should be something about him that was sort of mysterious, and just sort of like, you don't get quite a fix on who this guy is. So
Hmm.
so whereas he is a benevolent person, he's not warm and cuddly. He doesn't tuck you in at night. Um,
Hmm.
yeah.
Gotcha. And then, real quick, could you go into, I guess, a little bit of the lineup of the characters? Because I know Wolverine's a big part. in this too.
Oh yeah, it's how Wolverine joins the X-Men, which is a story they never
Mhm.
told in the movies.
Right.
He
Yeah,
was in the
so
movies.
it's it's the Byrne Claremont team. It's it's Wolverine, Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, Jean, Scott, and Nightcrawler. Oh,
So you're saying there's no Toad in it?
well, Toad's in it. No, wait a minute. Hang on.
Oh,
Oh,
he
He
no,
is
is
in
in
no,
it.
it.
Toad is not in my screenplay. No, there is no Toad in my screenplay.
Oh, yeah, so there's no Toad.
The
Okay.
Brotherhood is there,
That's
but
good.
not Toad. The Brotherhood,
Okay.
by the way, is the Brotherhood from Days of Future Past. And here's the thing: is
Okay,
I didn't
cool.
have Destiny, and although
Mhm.
it's the Byrne Claremont team of X Men, um, I didn't really see any use for having Banshee in it, and Jean Grey is part of a team, and this is something that most people don't realize. During the whole Byrne Claremont era, from issue number 94 when they brought the X Men back, through her death, she was never part of the team. Her picture was never in that corner box. She wasn't. She was there as a guest star. She was there with our
Mhm.
team, but she wasn't officially an X-Men member. She left the team. They had them all graduate in X-Men '94, and then she reappeared in the book, and she was in it quite a lot. But she was an actual team member, and
Mhm.
most folks don't realize that.
Wow.
Yeah. It was something too that struck me when I was because I revisited the original like Claremont stuff recently, and I was just like, okay, this is a lot different than what I remember when I first read it. Partially because you sort of associate or think or assume that the lineup is a certain way or certain characters are there longer than they actually were. So,
What were the things that
yeah, I
struck
mean, I'm
you when
looking
you
forward to
when you
hearing it.
reread them?
Hmm?
What was the thing that struck you when you reread them? Who did you think was in it longer? Who did you not remember was there? Who
Oh,
struck you when
well,
you
Gene was part of that.
uh-huh.
Gene was definitely part of it. Wolverine, it struck me just how slowly the information about Wolverine came out in terms of not even knowing his name was Logan, or the other team members not even knowing his name was Logan until much, much later, or it feeling that way compared to like, because in the movie, it's just like, okay, his name is Logan, he's got flashbacks to the adamantium and all that stuff, because at that point they already knew that. But in the comics, like they were still evolving those aspects.
I love the
So
fact. Do you know when the X-Men found out his name was Logan?
is it when is it with Alpha Flight?
89?
Hmm?
1989 or so, or like pretty late in the game, right?
Well, it's more like it was like 1980. Um, the final issue had Kitty Pryde fighting one of those demons. It was that Christmas issue where she's alone in the
Yeah.
mansion and she fights a creature that we weren't supposed to realize was a ripoff of Alien. They really thought we wouldn't notice. Seriously. Anyway, the story right before that was a two-part story where Wolverine goes up to make nice with Alpha Flight, and they go out and they fight the Wendigo. And that's the issue where the X-Men found out, because they Heather McKenzie comes into her house. Heather Hudson. She comes into her house and she sees the door is open. Oh my God, someone's broken into her house. And she grabs a broom and she goes into her kitchen, and she's gonna like whack this guy. And you see Wolverine is there and he's drinking a beer, and Nightcrawler's there, and she's like, "Oh my God, Logan!" It's like, Wolverine. She called you Logan. That your name? Goes, yeah. You never told us. You never asked.
Yeah.
The
Such a
team didn't
Wolverine thing
find
to
out
say.
his name was Logan. The team didn't find out his name was Logan until like the very end of the Byrne Claremont issues. I mean, we
Hmm.
spent a lot of
Oh
time
my
with that
god.
character without them knowing it. We knew it because a couple of times it got dropped in there. Like,
He tells Mariko.
and also there's a leprechaun who knows what his name is.
Yes.
Leprechaun.
Remember that
Black Tom.
they went to Muir
Huh.
Castle? No, not Muir Castle. It was
It's Black Tom's castle or something.
yeah, Black Tom and Banshee.
Cassidy
They went to
Cassidy Keep.
Ireland and they went to this castle and there's a
Mhm.
leprechaun there and it's like, oh, Mr. Logan. It's like, hey, how do you know my name? Oh, the little people. We know a lot of things. And then
Mhm.
there was Mariko. And then there was like one other point where it got dropped in, but but nobody knew it except for the fans. And I love when
Mhm.
they did stuff like that. It's kind of like, they didn't know it, but we do. Um,
Yeah.
they did something really clever in the X-Men book. They showed Magneto for no damn reason at all. They had one page with him where he's looking at images of his wife, Magda, and he's thinking, oh,
Mhm.
I loved you so much, and these stupid people, these humans, didn't understand you and appreciate you, and that's why you're gone from me forever. And it's like, well, that's a rather strange interlude. And that same month, they had we find out at Mount Wundagore that it's like they meet this let me see, it's a Quicksilver and the Scarlet Witch meet a cow who named Bova, I think, and she tells them that she is the one who gave birth to them, that she was basically the midwife for them, and then she tells
Mhm.
them that their mother was there and she showed up at her doorstep and she was very pregnant and this cow is a result of experimentation by the high evolutionary. I think it goes back to that kind of thing.
Ah,
But
okay.
there was this mysterious woman named Magda who gave birth to these two children and then died in childbirth. And so anybody reading those two issues would be like, oh, wow, okay. Now we know who Wanda and Pietro's parents are. So we knew that, but they
Mhm.
didn't. It was like, it was a
Hmm.
secret from the characters. Like the Marvel Universe didn't know, but the Marvel readers did. And
Mhm.
I love when they do stuff like that. So yeah,
Yeah, it's really fun.
it's really fun. Um, yeah, I had Magda in a very similar role in my screenplay, and the whole thing about Wolverine's name is in fact kind of part of the character arc in the film. So
Oh,
so
that's
it's
cool.
actually in there because I thought that was a wonderful thing about him, and it was very very telling. So I decided I wanted to make that part of the movie. Whereas in the
Mhm.
animated series, where it's the first adaptation, it's like everyone knew his name was Logan from the get go,
Yeah.
and they did make and I wanted them to be a little bit more mysterious about him. I wanted him to be a little bit more quiet about his background, but they just sort of they didn't do that. So that's fine.
Mhm.
But there were still lots of things that we were finding out along the way, like we didn't know about Alpha Flight because they didn't tell the story. So so
Mhm.
they got to in the second season do X lies and videotape, and so you got to see Alpha Flight in action. And it was written by Len Wein, who co-created Wolverine. So
Mhm.
Right.
Gotcha.
yeah,
Well, I'm looking forward to checking out the dramatization. I know they haven't dropped the edited version yet, but I definitely want to check that out, and I'll let you know what I think.
I think you should wait for the edited version because in the live version, everyone's mic is at a very different level.
Uh,
So the narration comes in very soft, and other people's
mhm.
came in very hot, and it's kind of disconcerting hearing like Nightcrawler comes in very soft, and what he says is a little difficult to sort of understand because he's speaking with an accent and he's using a lot of German phrases.
Sure.
So if you
Hmm.
can't hear him very well, it makes it a little more difficult.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so
for sure.
there were things like that. So I think that when they modify the levels, I think it'll be a much better listen.
All right. I'll wait for that then.
Yeah, I think it's
Sounds
going to be
good.
worth the
That's
wait.
cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Andrew.
Okay, sir. I just have to thank you first of all for an awesome childhood. I know, like, you contributed to like one of the best shows ever, in my opinion. And like I've said this before, I interviewed the Leewalds a few years ago, before the pandemic even, and I told them this. I'm going to tell you this. I was just so in the pocket for this show when I was like 10. It was so perfect. Like I was ready for cartoons to be more serious. Like, it could not have come at a better time. And I fucking loved that shit. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. And so I think my first question is like, the Lee Walds and Margaret Lesh got this thing called X-Men going on. Were you there from the very beginning?
Well, let's put it this way.
Or did you step on midway?
Well, first of all, I want to point out that Margaret Lesh was the executive in charge of Fox Kids. Like, that was her.
Yeah.
She had a whole network on her shoulder, and she basically, it's like, she was the mother of Fox Kids, and
Yeah.
the whole, like she basically founded it, and she spearheaded the whole thing, and she had been at Marvel Animation, and she worked on shows like Muppet Babies, and she always wanted to do X-Men, and it's like she worked really hard to get X-Men on the screen, and to the point where, and this is the thing that this is the big takeaway. She said, "I want to do X-Men," and a lot of the executives over her were saying, "Well, we're not sure about this," and so she staked her career on it. She said, "I'm going to do this series, and if it tanks, if it's terrible, if people don't watch it, then I will leave. I will resign." And so she staked everything on it. That's one thing that I will always deeply appreciate her for. The other thing was, who do you think her favorite X-Man was?
God, it's a good question. I'll just say Wolverine. Safest answer.
I was hoping you weren't going to say that. You'd think that okay, Wolverine's this violent character. He's got these big fucking claws. You think that, well, it's not this. Do we need to have this character on there? He's kind of abrasive. He's not nice, and she loved that character because he was so conflicted. And I loved the fact that she wasn't just, about, let's get these Boy Scouts on screen and watch them be heroes. I mean, she really liked the fact that that these characters were in fact conflicted. You were at the right age at the right time to really appreciate X-Men. I was
Are you
in
kidding?
exactly the right place at the right time to do the X-Men, because anybody who's going to sit down and write an X-Men screenplay, knowing it's never going to get made, knowing he's never going to get paid for it, has got to be psychotic on some level. Well, I was working with a writing partner at that time, and the two of us, he was working over at Fox Kids as an assistant for Sidney I. Wanter, who was an executive in charge of several shows, one of which was Project X, which was a super secret project. It was Peter Pan and the Pirates, and they wanted to keep it a secret because they didn't want Disney crawling up their ass while they were making it.
Okay.
Because Fox Kids was starting out in competition with the Disney Afternoon, and Disney was really displeased about this. And if they found out that one of their most popular characters of all time, because Peter Pan is their character, no one ever did Peter Pan first. So they went to two of my college professors, two of my at UCLA, Howard Suber and Dan McLaughlin, to vet the series to make sure that intellectually and visually they wouldn't overlap in a way that would cause legal problems for Fox Kids. So if there was anything that was original to Disney, it's like, okay, you can't do that. You can't have the alligator be this happy puppy character. You have to make him dark and ferocious because, the happy puppy one is Disney's. There were certain things in it that they just, you had to make sure that you weren't doing stuff that Disney could say, hey, you're basing this on our work. So anyway, they hired those folks to do that. And Sydney was overseeing that show and a couple of others. And then they did the Beetlejuice series. So my partner and I came up with several pitches for Peter Pan and the Pirates. And they, it's like, okay, that's very nice. Thank you. Have a nice day. And then we came up with some ideas for Beetlejuice. Now, here's the thing. Marty came up to me and asked me, hey, do you want to write some ideas for Beetlejuice? And I said, no. Um, Whereas I sat down and came up with ideas for Peter Pan with him. I just thought about it, and it's like I don't want to write cartoons. Cartoons suck. Because when I was a kid, cartoons were wonderful. They had Batman and Superman and Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, and it was all superheroes all the time, and I was in heaven. And then I woke up one morning, and all my friends had disappeared. It was it was a Saturday morning where suddenly it was Scooby Doo and the Archies and children either playing rock songs or solving mysteries, and everything got soft and everything got silly, and there wasn't a superhero
Mm.
to be found. And that's because parental groups were really
Mm.
tired of all these weirdo heroes. And, they thought it was a bad thing that these children were seeing, all this violence. And if you look at the Batman cartoons and stuff, if you look at Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four, it's like what violence are you watching in here? This is the tamest shit humanly possible.
Right.
So by the time the 80s
Yeah.
came around and you had parental groups who were just, more powerful than the executives, and you wound up with shows that were, either based on toys or based on serial characters, or, they were all super gentle. And so you had the Smurfs and you had the cows of Moo Mesa, and, like it's, I mean, they had just had all these shows. The Care Bears. They had, My Little
Yeah.
Pony. Oh, now My Little Pony has come back as this kind of hip, too hip for the room, kind of like, like ironic adult thing. I mean, people love the current My Little Pony, but originally, it was
Yeah, yeah,
literally just soft and pink and rainbows, and that's what cartoons were at
yeah.
that point. Cartoons basically sucked, except around 1987 or 88. Um, Ralph Bakshi spearheaded a Mighty Mouse cartoon that was irreverent as hell and amazing. It was like the shot word around the world, where it's like, oh my god, cartoons are fun to watch. And so I would wake up at, like on Saturday morning to watch the mouse. And then about a year or so later, um, Tiny Toons came around, and The Simpsons, in the evening, like suddenly animation had a hope again. And so, but I didn't want to write cartoons. I didn't want to be a cartoon writer. So, I told Marty I wasn't interested, and and he's like, well, no, 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 it's going to be really good. It's going to be what they. And I'd already seen the Beetlejuice cartoon on ABC. It was set in Peaceful Pines, and Lydia had a leak in the faucet, so plumber Beetlejuice shows up, and wackiness ensues. And I thought,
So I gotta tell you, because of my age, I saw the cartoon
uh
first,
huh,
and I was a huge fan. I had the action figures, everything, and then eventually after that, I see the movie, and I was like, "Oh, he's like kind of a bad guy," because in the cartoon, he and Lydia are just getting up into hijinks together all the
right.
time. And
But
yeah, it was just my, and I'm sure I'm not alone.
but you watched.
Everybody, probably many in my age group are similar, but it was opposite than probably anybody older than
Right,
us
but
had.
the Beetlejuice you watched was the Fox Beetlejuice, I'm guessing.
Yeah,
Okay. The
yeah, it was
original
that cartoon.
Beetlejuice,
Yeah, cool intro too, by
the
the way.
original Beetlejuice was on ABC, and it was a softer show. And what Marty told me
Okay.
was, no, 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 we're not going to do that cartoon. It's all going to be set in the Neither world, and it's going to be like wacky and irreverent. And they want to do it like the old Warner Brothers. And and in fact, there was a presentation for the affiliates that Margaret did, where it's like, if you see these two shows, you're going to see a very big difference. Because whenever they did a show that was based in a series that was somewhere else, the whole thing was, no, no, no. What we're getting is unique and marketable, and it's not just the same old thing that's already on the air. And so they wanted to let them know, this our Beetlejuice is not the same as their Beetlejuice. So the idea was they were going to do it wacky and surreal and really weird. And so I said, look, Marty, let's because we'd written a bunch of stuff together. We wrote a screenplay together and um, a few spec sitcom scripts together, and we got along really well as writers. We did really really, we just I think we learned a lot from each other, and we just did some really great work. And I said, you know what, Marty, I'll make you this deal. If we're going to write at the top of our intelligence, if we're going to fight about this like it matters and treat it like it matters, then okay. if we're going to waste the time of 9-year-olds 30 minutes at a time and just write stuff that's good enough because it's good enough because it's for a bunch of, children, I want no part of it. So if we treat this seriously, then yeah, we'll do it. And we shook hands on that, and we sat down and we came up with some ideas, and we were lucky to get a single episode. And then when the smoke cleared, we'd written 7 out of 65, which is kind of a miraculous statistic considering that we came in kind of late.
For Fox Beetlejuice.
For Fox's Beetlejuice, yeah. Yeah, the first
And
one,
that's what led into you're getting the X-Men gig.
well, that's the thing is, the story editor who hired us at first was Eric Lewald, who was a new story editor on Beetlejuice. And Sydney's like, hey, give these 2 kids a chance. And so when Sydney and whoever read our premise and said, yeah, we want to do this, we were sent to Eric, and we worked with Eric. We worked with Eric for our first 2 or 3 episodes. Loved working with Eric. He's a terrific guy.
That's cool.
And
That's cool.
so we had a great working relationship with him, and we had a great relationship with Fox Kids. And Marty, again, was working as Sydney's assistant. Well, I get a call from Marty saying, hey, you'll never guess what they're doing next. They're doing X-Men. And I'm like, and the guy behind it's going to be Eric Lewald. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He likes us. So, and the thing was, Eric did not know who the X-Men were.
He mentioned that. Yeah, they had to get a book.
Well, they
learn all about it.
Him,
But
they
when
said,
they got the gig,
he's like, so that's a Marvel comic, right? And so because he was not that familiar with it, and because there's a lot of ramp up. I mean, the X-Men were about, let's see, was this 9? They were 30 years old at that point, right? There's 30 years of X-Men at that point. So there's a lot to assimilate. So I came in, and I was acting as the X-Men expert. I was like the advisor, and I was telling them what issues to read and which ones that they could skip. And I wrote the character breakdowns. I
oh, cool.
because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a superhero show. I mean, if you sit down, I didn't want Cyclops to be a square-jawed leader who was very earnest, and no, he's got to be Scott Summers. He's a specific guy. And so what I did was I said, this is Scott Summers. This is who he is. This is what being sort of like the son of Professor X means to him, having the whole burden on his shoulders. This is how he looks at Jean. This is how he looks at Wolverine and the other team members. And then at the end, oh, by the way, he shoots I-beams. Because the character's powers were the least important thing to me, at least. I wanted to make sure it wasn't a show about superheroes. It was a show about people. And so in all the character breakdowns, I talked about who they were and talked about their powers last. I don't know that anybody.
That's how you broke it down to the Lewalds.
Well, that's how I wrote that. I literally wrote a document with all of these character breakdowns in it, and it wound up being part of the show's Bible. So yeah.
Gotcha. That's cool.
But I wanted to make sure that the characters, if they were going to do the X-Men, they were going to do it right. You know what I mean? I needed for the show to be right. And fortunately, I mean, I was blessed for being in the right place at the right time with the right people, because Sydney's whole thing was he wanted the series to be as serious as a heart attack. He wanted to make it, like full of angst and social relevance. And so the two of us.
Was there any pushback from anybody higher ups? Like, this is a little too serious. What are you guys doing? Did you guys experience any of that?
No, that was
so everybody was on board
series.
with that.
I mean, as long as Margaret was on board, then everything was just flowing great. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth, and with Marvel, there's a lot of back and forth, and because they wanted to make sure that the X-Men, was a good show, and that they were getting the characters right and everything else. I mean, they were very hands-on. They were very, they did not leave their opinions, secret. So there was a lot of notes and things going around at the time. But yeah, Sydney wanted the series to be extremely, extremely serious. He saw the X-Men. He wanted to portray them essentially as, it's like pre-civil rights America, So the metaphor was pretty heavy.
For sure, yeah.
And so the two of us would talk. I would be talking with him on the phone. It was like Friday night at 1 a.m. talking on the phone. I'm talking about Malcolm X, and I'm talking about Martin Luther King, and I mean that's how serious we were being about this. And
yeah,
so this series wound up being, that serious. It was a series that was based largely on its themes, unlike
yeah.
Batman, which was based much more on its tone. You know, so Batman is a much more
Gotcha.
atmospheric show, but because there's no
Right.
continuity, because they're all standalones, it's a very different animal from X-Men. And what I loved about X-Men
Yeah.
was that we did continuity, and they had a season arc, and even though they knew the episodes were going to be coming in out of order, they still had an order for the episodes to be aired in.
That's
My feeling
awesome. Yeah.
was, well, who cares if they don't air in the right order the first time? They'll air in the right order after that. So it doesn't matter what order they come in, really, because
Right. Right. Right.
it's okay. Suppose you see Wolverine in the beginning of an episode and he's badly, badly hurt. He's recovering from a fight. And then in the episode that follows, he's in a fight with Magneto where he becomes severely injured at the end. I think our audience isn't going to run out of the room screaming in a panic. I think they'll be able to say, "Oh, I guess this story happened before last week's story." I mean, I trust the
Right.
intelligence of an audience that wants to watch my shows. And
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
fortunately, the people at Fox, were of the same mindset. And so the episodes aired sometimes in kind of a janky order, but from that point on, they played in the right order, and the continuity for the season really made the shows play quite beautifully.
What was it that made you fall in love with X-Men?
When it first
Comic
there's a
book
series of ironies that
originally?
kind of like fall on each
Yeah.
other. I never liked the X-Men when I was a kid. Back in the 60s and 70s, when it was like this guy with the weird glasses, and this guy with the wings, and this guy who's covered with ice, and this guy with these big fucking feet. And this girl who seemed to be this girl's holding her head like she has a migraine like 100% of the time. I just had no movies for those characters. And then I was at a Marvel convention where they announced they're going to bring back the X-Men. It's going to be all new and all different. And my gut response was, wait a minute, what about the originals? I think we're
The
all
ones you
afraid of
cared about
change
so
on some
much.
level. Don't change this thing I don't like. So then they said, one of the characters is going to be Wolverine. And I'm like, wait, that shrimp from the Hulk? Because when you first
Mm,
introduced
yeah.
Wolverine, when you found Wolverine and when you read the Hulk 180 through 182, you thought you think of Wolverine as a badass because you found him after the fact. I read him in the course of the stories, in the course of the flow of the books, and so
Hmm.
the Hulk is fighting this giant Wendigo monster,
Hmm.
and then this little shrimpy guy comes along and gets in the way. And he's just this fucking idiot. And he just does nothing but make life more difficult for the Hulk. Then the Hulk finally has had enough of him, and bang, boom, just knocks him out of view, and that was that's the end of Wolverine, and so he's this silly little shrimpy character. It's like, well, we're gonna put him in the and at the time, like we all thought that the claws were part of his gloves. So it's like, well, is he even a mutant? Um,
Hmm.
but they announced he was going to be
Interesting.
part of it. And they announced that a couple of the older X-Men were going to be part of it, but it was going to be basically a brand new team of brand new characters. And I'm as suspicious as anybody else, but I'm also like, you know what? If I can start with number one, I'm on board. So I got giant sized X-Men number one, and I loved it. It's a great issue. It's a great story.
Hmm.
And then I got X-Men 94, 95. And then I stopped reading the book because they brought on a new writer. And I'm like, if they can't commit to a team, how good is this book going to be? So I kind of like,
Yeah.
so after the first two issues, I'm like, I'm not, and they have this guy, Eric the Red or some shit. I don't know. I just wasn't
Hmm.
interested. So I stopped reading the book. And then like three issues later, I was at a convention, and a friend of mine, is holding the X-Men book. I think it was 98 or 99. And he opens it up and he goes, "Oh, look at that! Wolverine's claws are part of him." And I'm like, "What?" And then I'm looking at they're fighting Sentinels in the middle of Rockefeller Center, and Wolverine's got his claw, and everyone's like, "Oh my god!" Because you'd never seen Wolverine with his claws out when he was in civilian clothes, and nobody knew at that point that the claws were part of him. The characters even said, "Oh my god, your claws are part of you," and I'm thinking, "Wow, that's cool." And suddenly I was intrigued, and because I was intrigued by this, I started buying the book again. And the more I read it, the more fun these characters were. So Nightcrawler, they were always finding out some new power that he had. Um, Nightcrawler was very much Dave Cockrum's character, and he created him to be part of the Legion of Superheroes. That's how he designed him. Also, Storm was two different characters who were both meant to be new Legion characters. Because Dave Cockrum, I think he either worked at DC or he was very, very, invested in Legion of Superheroes, and so he was creating characters for them. When you had that story with the Sha'ar crystal, that whole epic thing where you had the Imperial Guard,
the Starjammers.
No, not Starjammers. Those were pirates. The people like Lalandra's fighting force, her whole Justice League of superhero characters. It was the Imperial Guard.
That's what, Gladiator or whatever.
Yeah, Gladiator and those guys. Okay,
yeah,
that whole team is the Legion of Superheroes.
Okay,
they were doing a whole riff on it, and when John Byrne came on the book, he did the last issue of it, so he found himself doing this book with a parody of characters he didn't even know about or care about, which was kind of weird and ironic. Anyway, how did I start on that? So,
talking about your initial love for X-Men.
Hang on a second. So, Dave Cockrum loved Nightcrawler so much that he would sort of like put him wherever he could in the books, So he kept finding new powers. It's like if he's in a shadow, he's invisible, and he can teleport, and he can do this and do that, and so he became very central, and he's a great character. I just loved the character. Wolverine was always in the corner doing something, interesting, and he had this unrequited love for Jean Grey. He always seemed to have a crush on Jean Grey, but he was never prepared to do anything about it unless she was dead. So,
right.
Which is why, by the way, I credit myself as being the one who put the love triangle into an actual love triangle as opposed to a theoretical one. Because in the early issues, like she's in the hospital and he shows up with flowers, and then when he sees everyone else is there, he throws the flowers away and walks away dejected.
He's just shy.
And then later on, when they think that she's died, during the fight with Magneto, you see him looking at a picture in the Savage Land, going, "Ah, Jean, I had plans for us." And then when the team reunites, when they reunite with her, he doesn't follow up with that in any meaningful way whatsoever. And then when she died for real, he was like, "Ah, Jean," he's looking at her grave, going, "Ah, I had plans for us." And I'm thinking, what are these fucking plans? And then she gets resurrected, right? And then, they're together all the time, and there's no hint about him having any kind of anything for her. So whereas there was, the seeds of having a love triangle was there. I thought that, one of the things that Wolverine would want to do is really stick it to Cyclops. And one of the ways that you stick it to somebody is basically go after his girl. It was a thought that I had initially. But and that actually shows up, in a form in my screenplay. But what I figured would be fun was, why don't we actually have this love triangle? Why don't we actually have Wolverine actually pursue Jean, who is in
the cartoon,
Cyclops,
right?
And Cyclops is in love with her. So for the first time ever, it was an actual thing. And then suddenly it was in the comics, and suddenly, like now, it defines those characters. But we did it first in the animated series. I was the one who actually made that happen, as opposed to it being some theoretical thing.
This is in Captive Hearts?
This is Captive Hearts. Yeah, see?
That's cool.
Yeah, I love that episode. I loved working on that. That episode is a real favorite for me for a lot of different reasons. One of which is Professor X puts Storm in charge of the team, and she has crippling claustrophobia, and they're in a subway. So she is in a state where she could basically just skits out at any time. And Gambit is there turning to Wolverine, going, Wolverine, you're a natural leader. You should be running this. He's like, nope, Charlie put her in charge. And he's like, yeah, but look at her. She's going to have a nervous breakdown. We're going to need you to take over. And Wolverine's like, she's in charge. Period. I love having Wolverine, who you think of as this kind of vicious, underhanded kind of character, showing that he will support the person who is in charge, and he's not looking to take over. He's driven by honor, and so that was.
He's so much of a loner to be a team leader, I feel like.
Say again?
Like he's part of the team, but in his heart he's still kind of a loner, and I think that kind of would clash with him being a team leader a lot of the time, unless they're much younger than him, I guess.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's my read on him.
Yeah, but my point in that scene was, he wasn't going to usurp her leadership. He was going to back her no matter what, which is why
he has respect still.
Which is why he was shutting a Gambit down so much. But there are scenes in it where, it's very, very clear how much he feels about Jean, and he is working against his own best interests by doing everything he can to help Scott. So I liked a lot of that dynamic going on there, particularly with Wolverine.
You wrote the Sauron 2-parter too, is that correct?
Sort of.
Okay. Was it your idea to have the kaiju battle at the end? Because I just rewatched that, and that shit was badass.
You know what? Here's how that issue came about. Here's how that 2-parter came about. When they first came up with the second season, what they wanted to have was, hey, why don't we see how the team does without having Professor X around? So we'll get rid of Professor X, and the team has to figure shit out on their own. Terrific. Well, what happens to Professor X? You know what? What if he's trapped in the Savage Land with Magneto, and it's like the Defiant Ones, where they have to rely on each other? And it's like, well, that sounds kind of cool, and so that's what they did. And so Sydney, I want her, the executive in charge, showed me this outline for the series, he showed me the arc for season 2. And at the end of episode 13, Professor X and Magneto find a boat and go back to civilization and rejoin the X-Men. And I look at Sydney and I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? There's no boat. They don't find a boat. What the fuck is this boat shit? No. The X-Men find out in episode 12 that Professor X is up at the Savage Land, and the team goes up there and busts him out. And Wolverine has his claws, and he rakes the living shit out of a Tyrannosaurus Rex. And it's the biggest blowout you've ever seen in your life. And Sydney's like, Skir, I don't know. You're just you're being a fundamentalist. I don't know. And then I swear to God, this happened. We're eating at the Stage Deli in Century City. We're having this conversation. We watch a movie and then we're hanging out together. A week later, we see another movie and we eat in the same restaurant and we're sitting in the same booth. And he goes, Skir, this season 2 arc is going to be amazing. In the second to last episode, you know what happens? Find out that Xavier is up at he's in the Savage Land, and they go there and they bust him out. And Wolverine takes his claws and he rakes the shit out of a Tyrannosaurus. And I'm like, fantastic. And who's going to write it? And he goes, well, we're going to have Len Wein write part 1 and Mark Edens write episode 2. And I'm like, what?
Oh.
and I'm like, Sydney, no, I'm writing it because I came up with that shit. I suggest when? Last week. Where? Right here. Because here, we'll get you another one. And so
oh my God.
We got to write the second Savage Land 2-parter. And
gotcha.
I can take, let me see. I can take very little credit for that. That was very much on Marty's desk. When he was writing that, I was writing the third Batman episode, because there reached a point where Marty and I were, um, we were each writing a separate script. So it's like, okay, he's writing this script, I'm writing this script. And then it turned out he's writing this series and I'm writing this series. So I was writing the X-Men episodes, and this, the stuff that you see, the first 3 episodes we did were very much, that was on my desk. Marty had a lot of input, everything crosses everybody's desk, but those were my stories. The first 2 Batman episodes were very much Marty's stories. And so there reached a point where I'm like, well, I don't feel the need to write this X-Men 2-parter. I really want to write a Batman. And Marty's like, you know what? I've written Batman. Why don't I do the X-Men? And so we swapped. And so that 2-parter was on his desk. That was, I consider that those are his episodes. That being said, I went in and rewrote a lot of the dialogue because I'm insane and I can hear the characters. And so every line was like, no, he'd say it this way. And no, he'd say it this way. And so none of the things that they were saying were made different structurally. It's just that, I just rewrote the dialogue to make them sound the way that I heard the characters talk in my insane head. But those stories are all Marty. It's all Marty all the time.
Gotcha.
So yeah, there is one thing that I feel kind of is mine at the end when they ask Storm, do you remember everything? She remembers everything she did. The idea that she felt free for the first time ever. The fact that letting all of that, like being unbridled, was something that she's like, I liked it. This sort of dark revelation that she had, something
Right.
I really wanted to have in there, so that it isn't like, oh, this thing happened to me, but we're all friends now. It's like, no, let's have her find out something a little bit about herself. So
That's cool.
that's the kind of thing that that's the kind of thing I like to have with characters.
Awesome, man. Just one more pretty basic question, but before we get into BTAS talk, favorite X-Men?
Characters?
Yeah, what's your favorite X-Men character?
Come on, it's all Wolverine all the time. He's the character that didn't really fall in love with the book, and
Right, the claws.
Where the book came alive was, and okay, when Dave Cockrum was drawing the book, it was Nightcrawler and the X-Men. When John Byrne was doing the book, it was Wolverine and the X-Men, because
Gotcha,
he just seemed to glom onto. They were gonna write Wolverine out of the book when John Byrne was joining it, and he said, "There's no way you're getting rid of the only Canadian on the team, and this Canadian is going to be doing a book." So they kept doing the book, but they kept doing these little things with Wolverine, showing how like devious he was, and showing how he had this kind of dark past, and all these little things that were so interesting that every time they would do something, I would just find myself more and more drawn to the character. So, one example was when they fought Alpha Flight. He's having a good time during the fight because he likes a good scrap, and he liked watching everybody fighting, and he was having fun fighting. And then when he saw people were actually getting hurt, he's like, you know what? No, let's you know what? People are getting hurt now. This is pointless. I give up. You can take me away. And at the very end, when he's hiding in the cockpit, when he has snuck aboard, it just showed a level of sneakiness that I thought was just absolutely wonderful. And they kept doing little things that showed how sneaky he was in ways that made him really fun, because it made him smart. And a Wolverine is a weasel, right? It's a weasel.
Yeah.
Not a wolf,
Yeah.
a weasel. Well, the character is.
Yeah.
So, I think of him as a weasel. I think of him as somebody who's devious, who's sneaky, who, even when he does something good, he does it in a way that is underhanded and just a little dark. And in my screenplay, it's very much like that. He does a lot of things that bring people into being better than they are, but the way that he does it is never nice. It's always sneaky and devious, and it's like, you're glad it's not you he's doing these things to. But
Mhm.
so that's the character that really just made the book pop for me. I love Nightcrawler, and
Yeah.
it breaks my heart that Byrne left the book when he did, because I felt like with that second to last issue where he sent Wolverine and Nightcrawler up into Canada, he figured out how to make the two of them a really great comedic duo. There's a lot of really,
They complement each other, right?
huh?
Mhm.
They complement each other in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, they
Yeah.
were just really fucking funny together in those issues. And I felt like both of them came alive in ways that they hadn't before. And it's like, if he stayed on the book longer and kind of stuck them together a little more, it would have been a lot of fun to watch. So I liked Nightcrawler as a character a lot. I liked all the when Byrne would draw him, it was just like amazing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I really liked Kitty Pryde when they brought Kitty Pryde on the book. In fact, I was shocked they didn't use her in the animated series. And when I developed X-Men Evolution, I'm like, okay, Kitty's on the team and Nightcrawler's on the team. And
Yeah, yeah,
when there was a little pushback, I'm like, no, 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 no. They're on the team. That's it.
Mhm.
yeah. Whenever I'm doing the rewatch for the show now and the ramp up for X-Men 97, and I'm reminded now, seeing as an adult, like you guys gave all the cool lines to Wolverine. Like everything that he says is cool. And I remember he says like "wanna bet," and he says that a lot in the show. And in my rewatch, it reminded me like I must have said "wanna bet" 1,000 times on the playground uh, as a kid, role playing as Wolverine or whoever. Like that stuck in my memory. So yeah, thank you for that, man. It was just one of the best shows ever made, in my opinion.
Had a lot of fun working on that. I liked adapting Days of Future Past. I liked
Mhm.
I loved doing the Rogue's Tale because
Yeah,
I got to tell a really great story that had never been told before, and I thought would be really powerful to actually have. Because when we first meet Rogue, she already has Ms. Marvel's powers, and we are
Mhm.
told
right,
what
right, right.
happened, but we are never shown it. And I always figured, this would be a really great story to actually show. So, so I was very, very happy to write that episode. And by the end of that episode, by the way, I got rid of all the kind of like inconsistencies in the series between how she was in the animated series and how she was in the comics. So by the end of this episode, she is the exact same character with the exact same backstory and everything that she was in the comics. So I was very, very happy to get to do that. But it's a really good, strong, poignant story, and it's
Yeah,
wonderful
yeah.
because the good guys aren't all good and the bad guys aren't all bad, and
I gotta say, me being 10, that exact point you just said, that was this show was kind of the introduction of that whole idea to me. Like the heroes can be gray, and Professor X and Magneto were friends. What?
Mhm.
Like that to me as a kid, that was like it just blew my mind among everything else that I was watching.
yeah. Well, that's the thing is that with the Marvel comics in particular, they kind of thrived on having those kinds of gray areas. And
Yeah.
what Chris Claremont always liked to do was, and this is sort of like to the detriment of the books sometimes. He would like we had such an understanding of who the villains were that they just sort of came around and became heroes. And he would do that with people like Magneto, and I'm like, don't make Magneto a hero. I mean, he's already a hero in his own brain, but
He wants genocide. Like, how can we
yeah.
make this guy a hero?
Mhm.
But one of the great things that he did was when Rogue was first introduced, she was a very nasty piece of business. She was horribly vicious and cavalier about how she hurt people, and she was just like this. She's just nasty. And
Mm-hmm.
Chris Claremont announced that she would be joining the X-Men. She'd be joining the team, and the fans just were having none of it. Like you read the letters pages, it's like if she joins the book, I'm going to stop reading. And half the characters on the team were like, "Hey, Professor, you can't have her here. She's bad news. If she's going to be here, I'm going to leave." And the
They're
professor's like, "We're
echoing the
here to help
fans.
mutants. We can't pick and choose. We have to help people who come to us for help." And
Mm-hmm.
for the next 10 issues or more, you could see the struggle that Rogue had being accepted by her teammates, and how they just didn't trust her, and how they just kept pushing her off in the corner, and how they were just like, and she had to earn everyone's trust a little bit at a time. And then now she's like a fan favorite. And so, the characters love her as much as the fans do. But initially, and very much, I mean, to Chris Claremont's credit, like, he was wonderful at doing things people wouldn't have thought to do. It's like when Cyclops left the team, he's like, "Okay, I'm going to put Storm in charge." And it's like, why Storm? No, Wolverine. You put Wolverine in charge. And it's like, and nobody would have thought to do that. And doing that showed a whole set of, like, it showed her a whole different side to her. It showed a different kind of authority to her when she stood up to people like Wolverine and said, "Wolverine, retract those claws." That was a brilliant idea. And the idea of taking a villain like Rogue and putting her on the team, that gives you all kinds of stories to play with. So, Claremont was a genius at doing stuff like that. And I love when he brought Kitty onto the team. It took her a long time to ramp up her powers. It took her a long time to develop a fashion sense instead of, dressing like a 14-year-old trying to be a superhero. And that stuff is delightful, The hero worship that she had for Storm, and how betrayed she felt when Storm, shaved her head and went punk. And Kitty was like, who are you? What, who's, you let Storm go. You've taken over her body. I don't know who you are. And it's like, and so the two of them kind of like had this big discussion where it's like, okay, I have to be the person I need to be. I can't be the person you need me to be. So you need to grow up and let me be who I am. And it was like, oh my God, these people are having a fucking serious discussion here. This is some grown up shit. Claremont was the first one to do stuff like that. So, in fact, that was the thing that I loved the most about the X-Men books were, Stan Lee was the first person to give characters an interior life, to have real relationships and have real attitudes about the people around them, and I credit him very much for that. I credit Chris Claremont for taking it to a whole new level with X-Men, where you had characters who were expressing this incredible kind of like self-doubt, like, Cyclops, being a leader and having all this responsibility on his shoulders and being quite grim about it. Having characters who had interrelationships that had a lot of different colors to them. He was doing that at a level that hadn't been done before. And I don't think he gets enough credit for having done that, because, all the writers who were around who were doing really good work, this was something that just brought things to a whole new level. And I can't think of anybody else who was doing that back then. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you can see, I mean, this stuff really occupies my mind. It really occupies my. Oh, it does.
It does with us too. That's why we have a show.
Yeah.
Thank you for obviously.
By the way, let me just say, I was very, very blessed to be in the right place at the right time when I was starting out as a professional, and I had just enough street cred to be able to get onto X-Men. And if it wasn't for X-Men, I never would have gotten onto Batman.
Right.
And then all the stuff that followed. I was in the exact right place at the right time when I was starting out in a career, and they were bringing back superheroes, and for the first time ever, doing them the exact right way. Because the thing that happened with Batman, the animated series, and with X-Men, and the stuff that followed was, this stuff wasn't just being done by professionals. A lot of the people who were doing this were out and out fans. So, with me on X-Men, I mean, you had professional writers like Eric Lewald, and he did a great job sort of distilling things down And the fact that he wasn't
Mhm.
as familiar with them allowed him to do a lot of things my brain would not have been able to do. So,
That's cool.
he didn't follow the continuity of the books. And for me, it's like, you have to follow the continuity. It's history. This is history. And
It's
so,
the Bible.
They're Trekkies though, right? They said they were Trekkies, so they understood fandom at least.
oh yeah,
They knew how important it could be to others.
Mhm.
That's the kind of vibe I got from them when I interviewed
yeah,
them.
I mean, and
Yeah.
they're terrific. Where it works out to me is if you get the characters right, everything else falls into place. As long as
Mhm.
Wolverine is Wolverine and Cyclops is Cyclops, etc., everything else follows. And the fact that Eric changed a lot of things was fine because he didn't change who the characters were. So, the fact that there were Sentinels before there was a Magneto, and the fact that there were certain stories where characters who weren't even in the books were the heavy hitters and things like that. Um, it was a real strength that he came in as kind of a an X-Men outsider as opposed to being crazy bugfuck like me. So I was able to provide a lot of you have to do it this way to counter.
Yeah.
This is the way we're going to do it. But the thing is,
Yeah.
with Batman, you had people like Bruce Timm, you had people like Paul Dini, you had like people who were such devoted fans of these characters. And they brought in people who were experienced comic writers who had already written Batman. And you also had people like me coming in who were like, fans. And
Mhm.
I love the superhero stuff. I love the superhero stuff. When I heard they were, like they were doing Batman, I'm like, oh, we're doing Batman now. This is going to be great. Um,
Mhm.
I wasn't like, I mean, I loved Batman when I was a kid. I love Batman. But when if we had to choose between Batman and X-Men, I'm like, Marty, you take Batman. I'll take
Right. Mhm.
Okay.
but
Nice.
but
That's cool.
because we loved this stuff so much, it showed up on screen. And I think the
Mhm.
reason that Batman the animated series became, to my mind at least, the definitive representation of Batman was because it was made by people who were deeply passionate about it. And they weren't just
Yeah.
taking on a job, you know? Good enough wasn't
Mhm.
going to be good enough. This stuff had to be fucking great. So
Mhm.
then you have people like Paul Dini, he's just a genius. And so
Right.
he would do these stories where he would get into the psyche of the villains, and he would get into the psyche of people's personalities, and there was a level of cleverness and realness to his stories that I don't think anybody else ever kind of achieves. Like
Mhm.
he'll do things in a way that is wonderful because it's real. Here's an example. There's an episode of Batman the animated series called Harley's Holiday, where she gets it's like Harley, you've been a very good girl. We're going to let you go out and spend the day out on your own. And so she goes out, and the idea for the story was, okay, so Harley starts out, she's having a nice day, and by the end of the episode, the entire world is chasing her. It's like the Blues Brothers, where every
Mhm.
police car and all the helicopters and a tank are all chasing her down. And the genius is that when the story starts, she's just walking around having a nice day. She
Mhm.
walks into a store and she sees a scarf that she likes. So what does she do? Well, she's Harley Quinn. She's going to swipe it, and then they're going to be after her, right?
Mhm.
No, she buys it. She buys it. But the woman behind the counter gets momentarily distracted and leaves that little tag on, that little security tag. And so when Harley goes to walk out the door and she sets off the
Mhm.
alarm, she skitzes out, and suddenly, she's running away, and she jumps into this woman's car and slides her over and takes the wheel, and they're taking off, and then we're off to the races. But it's through no fault of Harley's that this happens. If she had stolen the scarf, then it's like, okay, well, but it's like it wasn't her fault. And it's
Mhm.
something that
Right.
happened to everybody, right? We've all had that experience where it's like, it's somebody forgets to take the tag off. Um, but Dini is such a genius, and at one point Harley runs out, and there's this car there, and she takes the woman at the wheel and pushes her over and goes, "I'm taking over, Toots," and gets behind the wheel, and she just drives away. And the girl was like, "Hey, you can't do this to me. Do you know who my father is? And do you know who her father is? Remember the episode?
No. I
Her
don't know if I
father was
remember
this
that.
army general who was in charge of the National Guard.
Of course.
Oh, yeah, of course.
Daddy's coming in the tank." So it's like
That's how you bring in the Blues Brothers stuff of everybody chasing
this
after
guy
her.
gunning for her. I mean, that's just a level of genius. I mean, Dini does stuff like, that guy you just cut off in traffic, who's now following you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the Joker. It's like, what? It's it's the kind of he gets the kind of like, okay, what's the everyday situation, and how does that fit in with how can you take this remarkable world and make it kind of echo our own?
That is cool because I've never thought of Dini's writing that way.
This is in the early '90s. He did an episode called Joker's Wild, where this real estate crook is building a casino and runs out of money. And so he decides to trick the Joker into blowing it up so he could get the insurance money. How genius is that? And you know who it's based on, right? We don't even need to say who it's based on, right? But then you have these little touches. Bruce Wayne is in his room. Bruce Wayne is completely it's like this whole hotel is a theme to the Joker. And he's in this hotel room, and there's like a corner that's hanging loose in the wallpaper. And when he strips it away, he sees it's got this medieval stuff. And so it's like, this wasn't supposed to be the Joker. This was supposed to be King Arthur. He's doing this deliberately to lure the Joker to do this.
It's a great episode.
Cool.
And just to put a pin in this whole Paul Dini thing, Marty was working over at Fox Kids. I was getting to read the Batman scripts that weren't supposed to leave the office. And I'm reading all these scripts, and the first 10 or 12 scripts were kind of terrible. They didn't have they hadn't brought in Alan Burnett, and they hadn't brought in Michael Reeves and Marty Pasco and Paul Dini to be the story editors. They had a different crew of people writing the stories, and the first 12 or I don't know, maybe 18 scripts were really terrible. And so I'm reading, then there were stories like, there's a cat's eye diamond. Well, who's going to be, after that? And so
I wonder who's after that.
Yeah. So you had all these, these episodes. I mean, On Leather Wings was fantastic. I mean, wall to wall. But the stories that followed were really weak and just sort of like, I don't see this coming together. And the storyboards were coming in, and Sidney was really unhappy with all this. And he's like, no, this series needs to be better. You need to bring in, better people, certainly on the story level. So he insisted they bring in Alan Burnett. Burnett brought in those three other story editors. And so I'm reading these scripts, and the scripts are kind of like, they're just disappointing. It's like, this is not going to be the Batman show we were promised. And then I read, like, at the bottom of the pile, because, who gives a shit about Mr. Freeze, there was this script called Heart of Ice by Paul Dini. And I read this script I finally get to. And I finish the script, and I call up Marty, and I'm like, who's Paul Dini? He goes,
Get
Paul
him
Dini
on the
is
phone.
the guy who was a genius at writing Tiny Toons and at writing Batman. And ever since then, I was a Paul Dini fan, because it's like, how can you take a character that I just had no, had no interest in. He was always lame. He's a silly character, and do a script that was so poignant and so beautiful and so surprising. And it was wall to wall wonderful. And it's like, okay. So from
that one
on,
in it too,
Paul
right?
Dini's name was on the script. It went to the top of the pile. And he's my favorite writer out there. I mean, the man is a wall to wall genius. And largely because his ideas seem so simple. They just seem so simple. And I used to joke to people. I'm like, I hate Paul Dini. He makes it look so easy. what he did. He always made it look easy.
It's true.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So we do want to talk more about your time on Batman the Animated Series, but we will take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll ask a question from one of our Patreon users before we go into that.
All right.
Stay tuned.
Ads, 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 ads. Yay!
And we're back, and we are going to ask Bob Skir another question. This one actually comes from one of our Patreon users on our $10 tier. You can submit questions to our guests, and this one comes from Slight Rebellion off Madison, who says, to Mr. Skir, I want to start out by saying thanks for contributing to my childhood with some of the shows you've worked on. My first question is, as an amateur screenwriter who's only written 100-plus page scripts, I was wondering how different is it to write a script for a 20-plus minute cartoon, especially when it comes to shows such as X-Men, where you're juggling multiple characters and storylines. Does it put a tighter vice on the amount of dialogue and scene description you can use, or do you just worry about that in the editing stage? Let's start with that before I go into his other question.
Let me just read the rest of it, too.
Okay. Also, glancing over your credits on IMDb, I see you worked on an animated version of Little Shop of Horrors set in junior high. Who pitched this batshit idea? And can you elaborate on anything you can remember from working on it?
I remember a lot about that series, actually. And I'd like to think I helped them get out of a lot of trouble at one point. But let's take the questions in order. Okay.
Sure.
How different is it to write a script for a 20-plus minute cartoon? It's writing a screenplay and writing for animation are two incredibly different skills. The first thing that you're told as a screenwriter, because I got a degree in screenwriting from UCLA, the first thing they tell you is, if you direct from the page, you're an amateur. That's the sign of an amateur. You don't talk about where the camera is. You don't talk about what you're cutting on. You don't talk about what's in the frame. You don't talk about who's doing what. You just, what you're doing is you're writing in master scene, which means you write, interior warehouse night, and then you describe the warehouse and who's in it, and then you have the dialogue between the people, and then you only say whatever descriptions need to be there, an essential piece of staging or an essential detail. You're not writing everything out. Mm-hmm. Directing from the page is the sign of an amateur. In animation, if you don't direct from the page, you haven't done your job.
Okay, so they want that. That's interesting.
A 22-page script can be about 36 pages. And there's a lot of leeway. Every single show has a different format. I've seen animated scripts like Disney wants scripts that are like 55 pages long for a 22-minute cartoon, which I think is insane. There are other shows where they just, it's like, oh, yeah, we're going to write this show in master scene. And you have 18 or 19-page scripts, which I think is kind of insane, too. I like having to write a 36-page script because if you have to write all of the choreography, then the episodes come back looking the way you wrote it. So as you envision something, there it is on screen. Mm-hmm. And
right.
If you're writing for a TV show, they have this thing called The Room, where you'll submit you'll all get together, you'll decide what the script is going to be. If you're the writer for that week, you'll take the script home and write the script, and then you'll bring it in. And then when you turn around, none of the dialogue you wrote is yours because the room is saying, oh, have them say this, have them say that. Oh, this would be great. And then the show becomes 1,000 times better, but it's not yours. It's the room's. It's the show's show. The show's episode. Right. In animation, it's with the writer's episode. If he's writing everything and if he's choreographing everything on the page. So it's a lot more work for a lot less money, but it comes back the way that you wrote it. You have to be very economical in terms of your dialogue. There can be no fat because you figure, oh my God, how am I going to pay it? There are two phases in writing a script. One is, how am I going to fill 36 pages? That's the first part. Second part is, how am I going to get this down to 36 pages? The real estate gets taken up real fast, particularly with dialogue. So if you can say something in a 2-line exchange, don't use 3 or 4 or 5 lines to say it. Make your point, move on, because every line needs to move the story forward. It should also reveal something about character, and it should also, show about character relationships and have some attitude and be funny. But the main purpose of every line is to move things forward. If it's not moving the story forward, it really shouldn't be there. And the same thing is true with action. Every action needs to propel the story forward. So so you need to be very economical in your writing, and as I say, 22 pages gets eaten up real quickly. So what I recommend doing is what I do is I write it very, very long, because if it's overly long, when you cut it back, everything moves faster. And if you just write, it's like, oh, this script needs to be 36 pages. I find invariably that when you get to page 36 and say, well, ding, 36, I'm done. It's like, no, this script isn't done yet. Even if you've gone through all of the story, there is still a lot of characterization and a lot of action and everything else that you haven't maxed out. And so you max it out and make everything way too long, and then you cut it back. And then cutting it back makes everything tighter, and it makes everything smarter, and it makes things move that much faster. And that's the thing. You want things to move at a really good clip, because 22 minutes gets eaten up really quickly.
Yeah.
In Little Shop of Horrors, it's not set in high school. The show was called Little Shop. There was no of Horrors. And what they did was they decided, hey, why don't we do Little Shop of Horrors as an animated series? We'll make it a musical, and we'll set it like in the 1950s and make it doo-woppy. But we need to make sure it doesn't. Little Shop of Horrors is based in a 1960 movie that was in the public domain. If anybody wanted to do Little Shop of Horrors, they could do it. It's public domain. What's not public domain is the musical that was made by Ashman and Menken, that was made into a movie by Warner Brothers, and everything that is original to that production is property of the playwright and Warner Brothers and whatever else. So what you had to do was make sure that the series drew its inspiration from the original and not from the musical remake. And so when I was reading through it, at one point they had the character Audrey 2, and I'm like, you can't call it Audrey 2. They called it Audrey 2 in the musical. In the original, it was Audrey Jr. So it's like, okay, we'll call her Audrey Jr. And then the character just became Junior. So but if they had made it Audrey 2, then the people at Warner Brothers could say, no, sorry, you're stepping on our. Also, the feature film was set in the 50s and had this kind of doo-wop music. So if we're going to do a series with doo-wop music, it's like, okay, we're already stepping on their toes. So they had to make sure that the songs were very different from anything that was ever in the movies. And one of the other things they did was the plant was originally going to become from outer space. And I'm like, the plant can't come from outer space. It came from outer space in the musical version. In the original, they were kind of nebulous about it, but they kind of implied that Seymour created Audrey out of several different plants. But it did not come from outer space, and this plant cannot come from outer space. And what they decided was that the plant was actually a prehistoric plant that had been, like someone unearthed this embryo or something. So that's what they did there. But what you have to do is make sure, okay, don't step on these people's toes, because they will come after you.
Right.
So and that was especially true with Disney with Peter Pan. So I think that answers the questions. Oh, by the way, Little Shop.
I think so.
Little Shop was a really good show. It was fun to write for, and the episodes turned out pretty well. So I'm very happy with the show. A lot of it was very clever. A lot of it was a fun show to write, and I have very happy memories. It was the second show that I wrote because when we finished with Beetlejuice, they were still in production with Little Shop, and it was a lot of the same people who were writing for it, and they invited us on, and we had fun. There's a fun show to write for.
That's
Nice.
cool.
That's great.
I want to answer more
So
questions. What other Patreon questions do you have?
unfortunately, that's the only one that they had submitted. But that's just a shout out to you guys in the $10 tier to step it up.
Patreon,
Send us some
you
more stuff.
failed me. So, what do you want to talk about next?
I don't know, a little show called Batman the Animated Series.
Oh,
So let's go into the ones that you co-wrote with your writing partner at the time, Marty Eisenberg, which were What is Reality with the Riddler in the virtual reality realm, Lockup, where you also worked with Paul Dini on this one, and then his Silicon Soul. Out of these three, I know you mentioned two of these are a little bit more Marty's than yours. Is his Silicon Soul the one that you would say was more you?
I would say that Lockup is me.
Gotcha.
That was my episode.
Okay. I was hoping you'd say that because that's my favorite out of the three.
Okay, well, I'm very glad to hear that. What is Reality was a story that there was this thing back then called virtual reality that was brand new, and we, they did an episode with the Riddler where he was a computer criminal, so it wasn't that much of a stretch to say, well, what if he traps Batman in virtual reality? And that was the basis for the episode. Marty and I sat down and did a basic beat outline together. So we spent like an entire afternoon in his apartment coming up with, what happens in what order. And then it was up to Marty to, write the actual outline and write the script. And all of the riddles were completely from Marty. And, like if you're going to write a Riddler episode, it's all about the riddles. And I could never do that.
Yeah.
So if there was going to be a Riddler episode, it was going to be a Marty episode. And what he did with the riddles was absolutely genius. I contributed a lot with the basic story because a lot of it, I wrote a computer virtual reality movie, a mystery about a missing computer hacker. And it was a feature film that I wrote and refined over several years. And we pillaged a whole bunch of ideas from that, including the opening of the episode where this, ATM is going nuts. But really, the episode's Marty's, and the, as I say, the structure, all the action scenes, the stuff that happens outside the DMV, it's all Marty all the time. So I really have to credit him with that.
Nice.
The same way the Savage Land episode was that's Marty.
Gotcha.
With his Silicon Soul, that was a lot more even between the two of us. We did a lot of back and forth on that in terms of like discussing it. But again, that was his script, and all that happens, like all the action sequences and everything is very much Marty's. He did. There's one shot that he's super proud of where Batman is standing underneath it's like this sort of this like row of cabinets, and he's standing there, and the camera tilts up to the top, and then at the very top you see the robot Batman kind of like leans into frame, and it's a really amazing shot that they captured exactly what it was Marty was describing, and he was so proud of that shot. And I'm like, every time I see that, I'm like, yeah, that's a good one. That's a really, really good one. I love the idea of this robot becoming Batman to such a degree that it could not stand the fact that it took a life the way that Batman could not take a life. Basically, that he that he just became he became Batman, and he became worthy of being Batman. So I thought that was nice. The title is my title. And I can say that wholeheartedly because I stole it from an episode of The Twilight Zone by Alan Burnett. No,
Alan Burnett. Alan Brenner.
Alan Brennert. See, the names are very similar. Alan Brennert wrote an episode of Twilight Zone called Her Pilgrim Soul. And it was nominated for a Writers Guild Award, and I think he lost that to Harlan Ellison, who wrote Paladin of the Lost Hour, which was brilliant. Anyway, I loved the title so much, and it just stuck with me. Her Pilgrim Soul. It just seemed so absolutely evocative. And so when we came up with the robot story, I'm like, yeah, you know what? The story is about this robot developing a soul, so we'll call it his silicon soul. And the last line of the script was, it had a soul, Alfred, a soul of silicon, but a soul nonetheless. And then the BS&P note came in saying, you can't say that the robot had a soul. You know, we can't talk about religion in our series. We can't talk about God. We can't have religious symbolism. So, you know, you can't say a robot had a soul. We're going to get letters. So the compromise was to make it into the form of a question. Do you think it had a soul, Alfred? A soul of silicon, but a soul nonetheless? And Michael Reeves, the story editor, was really, you know, he was mad about that compromise. And my thought was, it's better as a question. It's better to leave the audience asking a question, leaving that dangling, than to actually say it out loud as a fact. So it gives the kids more to think about afterwards. So I absolutely loved that we got that note, even though Michael wasn't happy with it. I think it made the episode stronger. And yeah, I love that episode very, very much. The episode I had the most to do with, the one that was really on my desk, was Lockup. And Lockup happened because Paul Dini came up with an idea for a character who was a jailer at Arkham Asylum who was able to keep everybody locked up. But because he was crazier than everybody else, Batman had to take him down. And I'm like, that's just too good. Oh, I'm going to have a lot of fun with this. And so it was up to me to give this guy a whole life and everything. So I based the character largely on Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver. You know, there's all kinds of little flourishes right from Taxi Driver. And what I got to do with the episode, and I'm super proud of this, is that if you ask people who Batman is and what Batman is like, people will frequently say, you know, he's vengeful and he's violent and he loves beating up bad guys and throwing them in jail, and you know, he's getting revenge because his life was ruined when, you know, criminals killed his parents, so he's going to get his revenge on it. And I don't see Batman that way at all. I see Batman as being a much more compassionate person. His life was badly damaged by crime, and he's trying to prevent other people from suffering the things that he suffered. At the same time, I'd like to think that he has a certain degree of compassion for these villains, that even, you know, he is pushed into having to be violent in every episode. I mean, it's, you know, part of the lot of being in an action show.
Of course.
But, you know, so it isn't like, you know, well, Batman's going to, you know, he's going to find a way to solve his problems with his words. It's like, yeah, it ain't that kind of show, folks. But it would have been if they made it in the 80s. It would have been, you know, the Care Batman. And, you know, and the Bat-Smurfs.
They made it when they did.
That's right, yeah. So,
the Transformers were fighting and stuff in the 80s.
That's right, yeah. So thank God for the Transformers. But they were selling toys in syndication. That's not the same thing as a network show. It's a whole different set of rules.
Right.
But what you're saying about Lockup is why it's my favorite out of the three, where it defines who Batman is. It gives very an underrated villain a spotlight as like, no, this is what the casual fans, who they think it is, and you use that to contrast and show the compassion or show the differences
Yeah.
and show what this character is really about.
Lockup is the character that people think Batman is. And the fact that Batman takes him down shows you who Batman really is. You're exactly right, Ben. And a wonderful thing we did not ask for that showed up in the episode, if you look at the design for Lockup, he's wearing Batman's colors. His outfit. Do you have a still with him on it?
I can pull one up.
Pull one up. You'll notice he's wearing blue and black and gray with just a little yellow, and it's all Batman's color scheme. And
that's cool.
His mask is like an inversion of Batman's mask in a way.
Totally.
But he totally echoes Batman. So he's just enough like Batman to make you see the difference between him and Batman. And Batman is not a ruthless vigilante. You know, he's not.
Right.
Yep. So here are the colors. You know,
Yeah,
we've got the blue, the gray, and the black.
Same set of colors that Batman wears.
And the inverse of the mask, where it's only his eyes showing as opposed to the chin showing for Batman.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. Was this, sorry for my lack of information on this particular character, but was he created for the show?
Yeah, he's original.
He was created by Paul Dini for the show. He wanted to call the character Lockup. I wanted to call him Deadbolt. Really wanted to call him Deadbolt. I thought that would be a much better name. But
did they think it was too close to Deathbolt, the other DC villain?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think Paul Dini just liked, he came up with the character.
Like
he wanted the character to have his name, and I get it. I totally get it. It's a great name. But yeah, he was created for this episode. He's the very first character to make the leap from being created for the animated series into being in the comics. He actually predates Harley Quinn.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of
predates Montoya too. He might, at least. I'll have to look into that. But yeah, he for sure is definitely predating Harley in terms of making the crossover. I remember him in No Man's Land.
Yeah. He's a great character, and a really, really great character. I was really, really, really lucky and glad that Paul invited us in to do this episode, because it was my chance to do Batman, and it was my chance to do Batman. It's kind of like, this is my statement about Batman. So
right,
that's cool. So I'm glad I got to put my stamp on the character. It's just confusing me here, because the whole mirror image thing. Anyway,
no worries.
Anyway, yeah, I got to put my stamp on the character and basically define him for myself, because so many people, I think, get him wrong. So, so very, very happy with the episode.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And again, that's why I appreciate it so much, is because as somebody who's like tired of that perception, it's refreshing to like look and be like, okay, here's an episode you can point to that shows you in 22 minutes.
People think Batman is the guy who breaks people's legs. I don't think Batman should be out there, brutalizing people. And that's what he's become to a lot of people, in a lot of people's minds. And I think they just get him wrong, They get him wrong.
Yeah. So we have some time to cover a little bit of a couple other questions I had for the other superhero shows that you were involved with. One of them being, of course, the Spider-Man animated series. Again, one of the ones that, we grew up with X-Men, Batman, and the Spider-Man animated series was certainly my introduction to Spider-Man before the Raimi movies. And I guess the question I had for Sting of the Scorpion specifically was how much of the original pitch involved showing or making it about J. Jonah Jameson's hatred for masked characters, because it struck me when watching this episode how like you don't get that in any of the J.K. Simmons appearances as Jameson, and I don't know if I've seen it in any other adaptations, but this is the one that really humanized Jameson and made him more than just a caricature who's just like, he's a menace, and actually like goes into why he thinks he's a menace.
That's very much a John Semper idea. He very much wanted to define why it was, instead of the way he used to put it was, I didn't want him to be this clownish character with a Hitler mustache,
That's That's true.
His main characteristic in the comics was the fact that he was a skinflint, the fact that he was so super cheap. And then that actually came through with the J.K. Rowling's,
Oh
I'm
yeah,
sorry, the
yeah,
J.K. Simmons.
Mhm.
Okay, am I saying that even
for
right?
sure, yeah,
J.K.
yeah.
J.K.
J.K.
Simmons.
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 Yeah.
Anyway, the fact that he's so cheap and everything. Every time Peter goes in there to sell pictures to Jameson, it always winds up, it's like he has to, use a crowbar to get any money out of him.
Right.
But John Semper was like, yeah, he wanted to say, why does he hate Spider-Man so much? And
Mhm.
so he came up with that. So that was in from a very early stage, and
Gotcha.
um, I have a lot of affection for this episode, for this script, because we were brought in very early on Spider-Man when it was first put into development, and we were given the Sting and the Scorpion. We were given that story, and there were no scripts that were done yet, so we were kind of writing this, blind, if you will. Um, and our script was the first one to be delivered. We were the first writers to hand them a script, and I have since referred to the script as the pinata because it was the first script. We're in the room with the executives from Fox, the executives from Marvel, the executives from the animation studio, and Stan Lee is there, and everybody is looking at this script because everybody wanted to do a Spider-Man series, but everybody had a different point of view of what a Spider-Man series was. So there was a lot of backing and forth and a lot of, like they say. So this was the pinata. Basically, we hung it up and everyone was like hitting it with a stick. I think it was
Jeez.
actually at the outline stage more than as the script stage, but still, we were the first ones to hand something in, and so we came under an extreme amount of scrutiny because it was so early, and because it's like, okay, well, the first ones that come in kind of set the tone for what is to follow. So because the scripts that come in, the ones that they send out to other writers to read, so you got to make sure, okay, does this represent our series? And so we had to do a lot of drafts on it and a lot of different just a lot of work on it, and we were really, really happy with how the script turned out. And then we were shocked and amazed that they got Martin Landau to do the Scorpion.
It's a hell of a get.
And this is
Yeah.
at the same time he was doing Ed Wood. So we got this guy at the height of his powers. This was an Academy Award winning Martin Landau.
That's cool.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what always stuck out to me when I got older and I was like really into the like older like Mission Impossible reruns and stuff, and following Martin Landau and be like, wait, he was the voice of the Scorpion, and I had to like go back and
He was
see.
the
But
voice of the
technically, that was
Scorpion.
probably my first exposure to him.
Yeah, he was I was a huge fan of his because he did a series called Space 1999, which was Jerry
Yeah.
Anderson's attempt at doing a Star Trek / 2001 style science fiction series in the 70s. And so Barbara Bain and Martin Landau were the stars of the show. And so I was huge fans of them. Yeah, that was that was that was quite a script.
Yeah, I can see that. So your work, we also, in terms of talking about your version of different villains, one thing that also stood out to us when looking at sort of your credits was the version of Toyman that's in the Superman episode Fun and Games. This creepy design with the almost ventriloquist dummy type of mask that's not in the comics is creepier and way better, I thought, than what's in the comics. Could you go a little bit into what the development was into bringing this version of Toyman to life?
Well, that's an example of Marty and I were the first writers outside of the writing staff that were brought in to write an episode of Superman. And we got to write the
Okay.
very first episode after the pilot. And the pilot, I think, was a 3-parter. And so we got to write our script. It was the first standalone story. And what was wonderful about it was that it went to a Japanese studio who really wanted the gig of doing the series. So they threw everything into the animation. They got their A team, and you could just see all the effects and everything. This episode, the people who worked on the pilot three-parter were looking at our episode, and they got pissed because the animation in our episode was like that much better. I mean, it's a gorgeous looking episode. So we got super lucky. We were given the Toyman. We were brought in and said, "No, okay, you're the first new writers, and you get to write the Toyman." And I'm like, "The Toyman?
Who?
Of all the people, the guy with the bow tie, he looks like a demented Jimmy Olsen." Anyway, they told us what the take they wanted for the character. They told us what the basic story was supposed to be, and our marching order was make him creepy. And when we turned in the script, Alan Burnett said, "You know what? You made him really creepy." So I felt like, okay, we did the job. We got to come up with great stuff for him to play with. They didn't do the things I wanted them to do. At one point, Batman was going to walk into the guy's lair, and all these action figures were going to come at him. These little tiny action figures, all going to fly at him. And and I wanted them to all be like Ozymandias and Rorschach and Night Owl. I wanted to make him the Watch.
Oh,
and it's like, yeah, we're not doing that. And at one point, I wanted him to be attacked by this robot Lobo with a giant key on his back, one of those toy turnkeys.
Yeah.
And then so we can't use Lobo because we want to actually use him later. And I'm like, I guess you do.
Fair enough.
Why waste a character like that? But there were a few things. Also, the duck in the episode, the big giant rubber ducky, I wanted it to be Plucky Duck.
Oh yeah.
But cooler heads prevailed. I think they figured it's too much of a call out. It would take people outside the show if it was Plucky. And also, if you make him an actual rubber duck, because they look so generic, it makes it look like a more fun toy. But my favorite thing in it, absolutely, and use a picture of it here, is the Dopey Doe. The silly putty. That was my favorite gag in the entire episode. I think that was part of what was just handed to us initially. I can't take credit for what Alan and Paul suggested, but that's what they wanted. They wanted this stuff flying around, and I choreographed it. And I think the scene is amazing the way it turned out, but the basic idea came from them, so I can't take credit for it. I can just take credit for how happy I am that it came out, like that sequence came out so amazing. And they do.
Do you think you affected Superman comics going forward? Like this, did your Toyman kind of affect Toyman in the comics going forward after this aired?
I'm not sure. You'll have to tell me. Look at how the Toyman was portrayed afterwards. I've seen it portrayed a number of different ways. So I don't know if they followed up on ours or if they just kept doing their traditional Toyman. But
got it.
But I was super happy with the casting in it. They got Bud Cort to be the Toyman, and he was the star of Harold and Maude, which is a cult classic. That's one of my favorite movies. And so the fact that they got him I was just so thrilled with that. And also they got one of the actors from Hill Street Blues, the guy who plays Belker. And his name is failing me at the moment, but he's one of my favorite actors from that show. They got him to do the voice of Mannheim, the monster in it. And I was really, really happy that they got him because he did such an amazing job. He was also Lockup, so I got to work with him.
Oh,
that's cool.
I got to work with my favorite actor from Hill Street Blues twice. Bruce Weitz, that's the name of the actor.
Gotcha.
So looking here, they did put this version of Toyman into Superman Annual 2023.
Oh, cool.
This giant as a robot as this design. I guess he's in there.
So
that's the image that I found.
That's not the actual Toyman. That's something that the Toyman created to fuck with Superman, right?
Right, but I haven't found the picture of the Toyman himself yet. I have to take a look at the issue.
Okay.
Well,
it's just cool because you wouldn't normally think of Superman in like horror too much, but this is like one. I mean, if they made, I would love to see more like horror Toyman when Superman. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, that's That's a great point. I think they had real opportunities to do a lot of great horror stuff with Superman. There was that
Yeah.
there's that one episode where this creature that's chained up to an asteroid falls to Earth, and Superman's like beating the crap out of it, and we don't even know what this thing is or what it's doing. We just know that it's, it needs to be stopped. And there were a bunch of episodes that had kind of a creepy edge that I think that the series could have used like more of.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
I love
yeah,
the fact
yeah.
that the series took so many cues from Kirby.
Hmm.
And I love the in Batman Beyond, I love that they did the Fantastic Four. I love that they did that
Oh yeah.
episode. And also, I don't know if you remember this or not, in Justice League Unlimited, they did the Defenders.
I've seen every episode, but I
Vaguely,
forget.
vaguely remember it.
They
I'd
had
have to see
this
a picture.
team show up where it is Aquaman and Solomon Grundy and Dr. Fate and
Okay.
Hawkgirl, and basically that's the Defenders.
In
Okay.
DC form, yeah.
Gotcha. That's cool.
Let me see. I just found a image comparison just from doing a little search here.
A
so we can
cursory
take a look.
search.
Yes, just real quick. But yeah, I can totally see what you're talking about. Since you've got the Sorcerer, in which case it was Doctor Strange. You've got Solomon Grundy as like the Hulk type. So I can totally see
Solomon
what
Grundy
you're-
crush.
Does he say that in there?
He does. He says Solomon Grundy crush.
Oh man.
Aquaman instead of
He's fighting a
Namor.
cop, and the cop is clearly supposed to be Thunderbolt Ross.
Gotcha.
I gotta take a look back at that one.
Oh yeah, it's
No,
totally.
I always love
and
it when they do this
I
type of
think
stuff.
they're
I don't think
fighting
I
a
remember that.
monster who is like sort of kind of a supernatural demon kind of character, which was great
Mhm.
because the original Defenders used to fight characters that were more like H.P. Lovecraft characters than super villains. So I was really
Gotcha.
glad that they followed that. Let me see. Yeah, that's Sal Buscema. That's a Sal Buscema
Mhm.
picture of the Defenders.
Gotcha. Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
Oh, you know
this
what?
has been
Pull
awesome.
up the Fantastic
Go ahead.
Four characters from Batman Beyond.
Hold on a second. Let me see.
Yeah, that I don't think I noticed either.
Oh my God! It was.
There's a lot
Well,
I
that
didn't
one was a
notice.
little more. Let's see. That one was a little bit more.
Maybe I didn't see this
Terrific
episode.
Trio is what they were called.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me pull that up. Here we go. So let me switch this off. But yeah, I definitely remember being like, "Isn't this just basically Fantastic Four?" When I was watching that as a kid.
Well, yeah, it was the Fantastic Four done right.
Did you write for Batman Beyond as well?
Beyond, in many ways, is Spider-Man done right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, it's
for
similar, huh?
It's Batman through the Peter Parker lens.
Right.
With Jared McGinnis.
Yeah.
So yeah, here we go with the terrific trio. I'm pulling up right now. So we have the team members with Magma instead of the Thing, and the Human Torch. They're all combined. Freon instead of Invisible Girl, and the 2D Man instead of Mr. Fantastic. So that's pretty fun.
But I mean, imagine
cool.
seeing the Thing done with that kind of, imagery. I mean, just I was watching that. I was in heaven watching that episode. like what
That's
Dini
awesome.
and Bruce Timm could have done with the Fantastic Four would have been mind blowing.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, definitely.
I would love to see a Bruce Timm animated series of Commandy Last Boy on Earth.
Ooh,
Oh yeah,
I hadn't
that's
thought about that one.
That would just be the
Yeah.
best. Swear to God.
Mhm. Yeah,
Maybe they'll
it's
do
funny
an
because
episode of it. You never know.
it's funny because I temporarily, when watching the Savage Lands episode, when Kazar showed up, I temporarily blanked and it was like, oh, it's Commandy. Wait a
I
minute.
thought that too. I was thinking that too. Yeah. Yeah.
Wrong name. That starts with a K.
Wrong
This
universe.
dude in this-
I never thought about that. They do seem to share a lot in common.
Right.
Although
have to
it's,
get back to you.
Mandy had a saber-toothed tiger as a buddy, he would have been wearing a tie and been extremely verbose. I think is the difference there.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with
Right.
Mandy.
So, yeah, I can see that. Yeah. All right. Well, this has been awesome, Bob. Definitely loved hearing all your stories in terms of working on on these different shows. And I guess, do you have anything you want to promote or plug?
You know what? I have a feature film coming out in a few months called Goldbeak.
Sweet.
It's about an eagle who grows up in a town full of chickens, and I'm super proud of it. I think it's going to show up either as on streaming or it's going to be theatrical. I think Lionsgate has it, and I'm not sure if they figured out exactly what platform they want to introduce it on first. But
Okay.
that's the thing I'm promoting at the moment. And
Nice.
I want to say thank you very much for having me on. This has been a lot of fun. Yeah, thanks for having me. If you want to talk again sometime, let me know. And if we, run into each other at a convention, let's hang. And this was a great time.
Yeah.
All right.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We'll send you the cut of the episode.
Sounds great. All right.
Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
End of the episode.
All right, big thanks to Dan for bringing up the visuals. It looks like you brought up just the right visuals, considering that, Skir was talking about Wolverine and Jean's love triangle of Scott, and just happened to have an image of that, or
Right.
the deadly Play-Doh stuff that was on, or putty stuff that was on Superman. So thanks, Dan, for just happening to pull up the right stuff. Let's go into comments. So some of these comments come from Andrew's episode on Superman and Goku similarities.
Yeah. So it was one of our very quick episodes. And it's comparing Goku from Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball and Superman. This is obviously a lot's being pulled there. Akira Toriyama is pulling a lot from from Superman. Everybody knows it. There weren't a whole lot of videos about it. There was like one or two, I think. So I thought I would throw my hat in that ring, and that's what happened. So this is the comment on that. Their planets also blow up. So I forget. I guess it's Seiya, because he's Super Saiyan. There's Saiyan. I think it's planet Seiya, and then of course and then Krypton. So yeah, there's that in common as well. So yeah, good catch on that one.
Nice. Cool. So thanks, UberX.
Yeah.
8073. Next comes from John Dango 3259. In the original Dragon Ball, Goku's story more like a Sun Wukong story. In Dragon Ball Z, Goku's story more like a Superman story.
This is good. This is a good pull too. Yeah, thank you for this. So, yeah, I've never read really a whole lot about this, but I'm aware of this. The Sun Wukong story. There's a lot of There's actually a lot of Chinese influence on Dragon Ball as well. I mean, them wearing orange outfits is a Shaolin Kung Fu thing. That's not a Japanese thing. That's a Chinese thing. So like, there's a lot of China. There's a lot of China in Dragon Ball as well, and Dragon Ball Z, which is kind of interesting. And there's the Monkey King and all that, like Goku, and the Saiyans have like monkey tails and shit. So there's that influence too, and like, I believe it, and I've never read it. I don't know the details too much, but it's got the Journey to the West, at least elements of that story in Dragon Ball as well. Of course, made much, skewing a lot younger, but it's through a very kid lens, but it's there from what I've heard, and so that's kind of cool too. If anybody doesn't know, that's a Chinese tale about it's Journey to the West, which is India. It's ancient Chinese people going to India, as far as I know. So that's culturally interesting. And I guess Dragon Ball Z becomes much more like Superman, but it's an evolving thing. It evolves all the time. So yeah, it's cool. And this is obviously just a shitload of influences on Dragon Ball.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
We also have a couple comments that were on the Descent into Mystery little short that we sent out. That's a little bit of a preview for our Patreon, so check that out. But Maestro86 commented a couple times saying, "I'm glad that Tim Rodier at Omni Music Publishing included the Latin and English translations for Descent into Mystery. However, the Latin and English translations are not included in the second edition book, but were included in the first edition. I'm very fortunate to own both editions. Also, if you remember the original 1939 Bill Finger Batman Action Comics, I think he means Detective Comics, issue number 33, where we get the origin of the Batman and how he came to be, Bruce Wayne is seen in his father's study, in thought trying to decide the disguise he will use to strike fear in the hearts of criminals. In that moment, a bat crashes through the window like an answered prayer, and it says, "An omen. He will become the dark, mysterious creature of the night known to all criminals as the Batman." So that's where, potential reference in that those lyrics saying that, referencing an omen. In Descent into Mystery.
Wow.
Would be a reference
Interesting.
into this.
Interesting pull. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
The connections being made.
indeed. So nice call out, Maestro. On that.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, but that does make sense. So sweet. On to the shoutouts.
Woo! All right, everybody. So, yeah, we have regular old school episodes every now and again now, don't we? Let's just thank some of our more recent people. Put Your Guns On, Michael C., Cyber 6, Tito G., and Skylar G., everybody else here, of course, and our other supporters as well. And now I'm going to remember what we say, which is we'd like you to do us a favor.
We want you to tell all your friends about us.
There it is.